Welcome back, my friends, to the Derate The Hate podcast. I am your host, Wilk Wilkinson, your blue-collar sage, calming outrage and helping to navigate a world divided by fog and those who would spread that fear, outrage, and grievance. Each week, I'm sharing stories from my path and using the power of conversation and collaboration with my many great guests. Together, we chart a course toward understanding, bridging divides, and fostering a community where wisdom prevails over discord. Friends, it really is about bettering the world one attitude at a time. We did not create the hate, but together we can derate the hate. The only good thing about a bad attitude is we have the ability as individuals to change it. For me, it starts with gratitude and personal accountability. I am so incredibly grateful that you have taken the time to join me for another powerful DTH episode. Please remember to subscribe and share the DTH podcast with your network of friends. If you would like to support the show, check out the Support Us page on the Derate The Hate website. With that, my friends, let's get to it. What if your political stress wasn't really about politics? I recently had the pleasure of sitting down with another great guest whose work aligns beautifully with the mission of this podcast and my work with Braver Angels. Chuck Gafvert spent over 2 decades as a corporate executive before making a radical shift. Today, he's a certified executive and Jungian psychology coach, helping people detox from the stress, anxiety, and emotional burnout caused by our toxic political environment. Through his political detox coaching, Chuck combines Carl Jung's timeless insights with neuroscience and wisdom traditions to help individuals regain peace and emotional balance, no matter who happens to be in office. In this powerful conversation, we unpack the hidden impact of toxic polarization on mental well-being. Chuck explains why our political triggers often have less to do with policy and more to do with our own internal struggles. We discuss shadow projection, tribalism, media manipulation, and how to reclaim your emotional sovereignty in an age of outrage. If you're looking for real solutions to the stress of political division, not just slogans or band-aids, this episode might just be for you. Let's get into it with Chuck Gafvert. Here we go. Chuck Gafvert, thank you for joining me on the Derate The Hate podcast. It is great to see you today, man.
Thanks. Pleasure to meet you and to be here.
Yeah, Chuck, you had reached out as a part of some of the work that I do with the organization Braver Angels, one of my favorite things to talk about. And so I started looking at the work that you're doing, and I see some incredible things here. I see that you were in the executive world for a long time. You became an executive coach. You're a Jungian coach. And then you kind of transitioned into the depolarization space, the toxic polarization, and how we can avoid stress in that particular part of our life. So Chuck, that's where I want to start our conversation today. I want to know a little bit about your story and what was the catalyst for that transition, because it's not something that everybody does. But I saw something about it being unfulfilling, the executive coaching thing, and then there obviously has to be a backstory there to how it led to your work in the depolarization space. So, Chuck, take it away from there. I want to start right there.
Great. Thank you. So I first want to say that I really, really respect the work you're doing, and especially kind of the depolarization and kind of quenching the outrage, one person at a time, which I think is the right way to do it. It's got to be a ground up type scenario. For me, I spent 25 years in the corporate world. I was a technologist. I managed software engineers. It was fulfilling until it wasn't, basically. And like a lot of my cohort, I reached a point in my life where, you get around and you see that you've done fairly well, but you're thinking, is this all there is? What am I going to do for the rest of my life? It's often referred to as the second half question, the second half of my life. The first half is often about, achievement and raising a family and doing things in the world to secure yourself. But then the second half of life can be an introspective journey where a lot of times people get back to questions they had when they were young and purpose they had when they were young. So I got out of the corporate world, got trained as a coach. I've been doing that for 7 years. And about 2 years ago, I felt the calling to do something different than the executive coaching that I was doing back in the corporate world. And that's personal coaching or life coaching, if you want to use that term. I enrolled in a course specifically for coaches to train them on Jungian psychology, which is the psychology of Carl Jung. He is famously known for the shadow, kind of coining those terms about shadow work, defining the persona and the shadow. And I felt a real resonance with this as a framework to be able to really help people. And midway through the course, I just noticed a lot of my friends were, for lack of a better word, suffering. They were suffering because of the political environment and for what they see as the external forces that are evident. You know, we hear so much about the things that are wrong and against what we believe, but we're very limited beings to be able to change anything. You know, I see this with technology. We're almost like demigods. We have almost omnipotent amount of knowledge because of the internet and news media. We can know anything that goes wrong in the global villages all across the world, but we have very limited power to affect change. And that creates tremendous suffering within people. So I kind of dedicated my niche in coaching to reach the people that I felt that could be helped by exploration of the stresses that are involved in their life from politics.
Yeah. And, well, Chuck, and it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing when people want to use their talents, use their skills to help other people. One of the things, talking about that second half thing and reaching that point in life where it's like, okay, what is my purpose? I know what I'm good at. I know what I've been doing, and I've created this thing, but now what is my purpose, and how do I use my skill set to help others get what they want, or help others cure what ails them? And it's an incredibly noble thing. It's a beautiful thing, and thank you for that. I do want to hear more about Jungian psychology and how that works. It's not something I've looked into a lot, but one thing I have looked into a lot, Chuck, is how so many of our friends are suffering. How so many people are looking at the world today, looking at all the things that are around them that are outside of their control. They have all this information flying at them all the time, but all of these different things that are outside of their control, they are allowing them to control their emotional capacity. Their emotional space is being bombarded by all of these things that are outside of their control, and there's not a lot that there's not a lot that people are finding that they can do to get tangible results for all the pain that they are feeling with all these different things that are going on. So I definitely want to hear about how that works. So let's start by telling people, what, Jungian, Carl Jung, the philosophies behind this, or the psychology behind this, and then I want to tie that to how this works to help people through some of that helplessness that they're feeling and some of that pain that they're feeling. So let's go right into that. And Jung, just for everybody, that was Jung, right? It's
that's right.
So Jungian psychology. Let's talk a little bit about that, Chuck.
Absolutely. Jung was a very groundbreaking psychologist, prolific writer, and he was both a psychologist and a bit of a mystic as well. And he recorded his own experiences. He was a pioneer in dream work. And believed that you have a conscious mind, but you also have an unconscious mind. And the conscious mind has ways to express itself. And one of those key areas that it expresses itself is within dreams. And it will be in the form of symbols or, visionary tales or stories that can be decoded, because these are archetypes and stories are common to mankind. So we've been able to look at people's dreams and kind of figure out what the subconscious is trying to tell them and integrate that into their lives. But basically, the model of Jung psychology that's, I think, most interesting and apropos to what we're discussing here is you have a forward-facing personality, and he called that the persona. And that's what we use to be graceful in society and polite, to get along with other people. And it's kind of like our marketing department wants to show other people that we're good people, and we want to portray our best attributes to others. That's our persona.
Okay.
But then there's other things that are called the shadow, not because they're evil, it's because it's pushed into a closet in the back of our mind. So these are the attributes that in our patterning, in our learning, in our conditioning as we grow up, are things that we deemed are not socially acceptable. And they may or may not be, but we, in our learning situation, maybe as children, learn to put them in the closet, basically.
Okay.
So if someone's overly aggressive, perhaps, and we learn that that's frowned upon because that's not playing well with others, we push that kind of aggression into our shadow closet. But the problem is we may not be assertive enough in situations. We may overcompensate by being too agreeable. So by understanding the shadow, understanding that aggression can be positive and negative, bringing it out into consciousness, it makes it available as a tool that we can use appropriately. So in that aspect, many women kind of suffer from this. Women are naturally team players. They get along well with others. But in the corporate space, I found that they can be kind of looked over.
Sure.
Because a man in the same situation will advocate for himself. He will say, I want this promotion. I need this promotion. I will be in your office every week. This actually happened to me when I was a manager. I will be in your office every week to talk about why I should get a promotion until I get it.
Okay.
And women oftentimes, not for all of them, but they have a tendency to be more team oriented, where they're not going to be self-assertive, and that's to their detriment. So understanding that aspect of the shadow and then integrating it into your personality so that you could be assertive when you need to without being overly aggressive, but assertive as a tool is just a small example of what we do with shadow work.
Okay. No, and I think that makes a lot of sense. And, I think about my own story here a little bit, Chuck, because now I used to be someone who was, I guess, a far angrier, and I had a lot of anger, a lot of animus from things that happened over the course of my life. I'd blow up easily at different things, and now, I've personally changed my life because, number one, I didn't want to be that person anymore, but I can see how somebody who has that capacity or is that kind of person, but holds that back because it's not socially acceptable, but then can overcompensate. I can certainly relate to that in certain respects, and I can see how others would do that as well. So with that being said, let's tie that to the concept of toxic polarization, whether it be in a situation where we are dealing with somebody who we disagree with politically, or even internally being able to deal with political situations. One of the things that I know you talk about is being able to release the stress and work through these stressful things, no matter who's elected. Still being able to be happy, or live a there's no such thing, in my opinion, as a stress-free life, but being able to mitigate those stressful factors. So let's tie this Jungian psychology, what's going on with the shadow part of our persona and the outward part of our persona, and how we work through those things as part of what you teach, Chuck, and how this thing works.
Yeah. I'm very much focused on the individual taking responsibility for their own life. And like you said, it's on my website. If you're waiting for the right person to get elected before you find your inner peace, you're never going to find it. Never going to find it. And moreover, you're just giving all the power in your life to an external circumstance that you have no control over. So no wonder people are frustrated, stressed, and mentally disturbed and irritated all the time. Plus, we need to recognize that we're living in what I call a toxic social media environment and news environment. And there's a gentleman by the name of Chase Hughes that has come up with a fate model. Are you familiar with him?
I've read some things from Chase Hughes, but I don't know him, and I haven't followed a lot of his work. But I've heard the name and seen some or read some of his work.
I like his fate framework because it stands for focus, authority, tribalism, and emotion. And it's very much, in my experience of what I see for people online. You have an authority figure, whether that's a politician or a respected news person, that's giving you very emotional and content that is outrageous. It drives anger. So you have these authority figures that are promoting emotionally fueled content. And what that does is it drives people into their tribes because it makes them scared. Even before the election, it was interesting. Both Republicans and Democrats were saying that the other side was an existential threat to democracy.
That's right.
They both used the same words. They had different reasons, but it was the same energy.
Yep.
And people may not even understand that it's happening to them, but they get driven into a tribe because we have 100,000 years of evolution that says being in a tribe promotes safety.
Yes.
When you're out there by yourself, you're much more likely to get picked off by a predator. So you stay in your tribe. So people naturally gravitate to the tribes because of the emotions that are driven and the fear that separates people. So we need to understand that we're in that toxic media environment. And it's the same thing. And media creators, they don't care what happens to your mental state of mind.
That's right.
When they create this stuff, because the incentive is for clicks and views. And that's very often done by the most outrageous content that we could have. So the first thing is just to step back and realize that we're in this toxic media environment. And then the second thing is to understand that even though it looks like my trigger is Donald Trump or Joe Biden or AOC or whoever the politician is, that it's really something inside of me that's being pushed, right? It's like if I had a splinter in my hand and that splinter causes pain every time I grab something, I could blame the thing I grabbed, but it's actually the splinter inside my hand. So the Jungian work has people step back, kind of trace the emotion and figure out what it is, where's the pattern that we have inside ourselves, what it is that we're believing that causes us to suffer. There's a Jungian psychologist named James Hollis, and he famously said, "The thing is not the thing.
That's
And
right.
maybe if you're married or in a relationship, you can see this. Your partner gets you pissed off, and it's not the actual thing that just happened. It's maybe a year's worth of historical baggage, or something that's tied to something that happened to me the first time I was in a relationship.
Yeah.
It's not the thing that happens right away. So the important first step for my clients is to understand it's not Trump. It's something deeper inside you that's a pattern. But the good news is if you can find it and bring it to your conscious awareness, it will dissolve. And it will not only give you relief and stress reduction from politics, you're probably affected and triggered by other people in your life the same way, because these patterns aren't isolated. These patterns come out the rest of our lives.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Oh yeah, it absolutely does, Chuck. Because I'm thinking about all these different things here as you're talking about these things. I'm looking at all these real life scenarios that fit into exactly what you're talking about, and how they relate to different scenarios that I've seen from people that I've had conversations with or coached or whatever the case may be. Right now, when we talk about Chase Hughes and his fate model. I think about one thing that I call it the fog model, right? Fear, outrage, and grievance. It's used by media and politicians and outrage entrepreneurs and grievance grifters in this toxic media or toxic internet ecosystem that we all find ourselves in, right? But then to bring it home, I love the splinter analogy, but to bring it home and talk about how people, okay, so it's not necessarily Trump, but now for me, when I think about this kind of thing, right, is or you use the analogy of something that happens with your spouse or your partner or whatever. For me, it's often not the thing; it's how I react to the thing, and I think of, and this isn't part of the spouse analogy, but whether it be anything, it's I often find myself, Chuck, getting more upset with myself that I'm even reacting to something outside of my control than actually the reaction, if that makes any sense. It's really weird. But as somebody who's gone from being a toxic person to now no longer being a toxic person and taking pride in the fact that I don't allow my emotions to dictate my actions, when I do find that happening, that compounds my frustration. So it's a really a funny paradox, right? But okay, so let's go back to the splinter analogy and how that relates to, say, your least favorite or your most triggering politician, right, Chuck? So when we think about and then we talk about the tribalism, right? So when we find this person who is our biggest trigger, and then all of a sudden we encounter somebody who is a proponent for or a fan of said trigger, now that thing or that person becomes this person, incarnate, whatever, because that person's not in our immediate circle of influence or our immediate sphere, but now this person is, and now we've got something right in front of us. And now we have our splinter. Talk about that a little bit, because that's where these things, and this I think comes down to a lot, Chuck, where people have taken their political identity and made it part of their personal or their core identity. So now that whole thing turns into an assault on our core identity. So I know I threw a lot out there in a short period of time, but you said a whole lot, and my mind's going in all these wonderful directions. Not necessarily wonderful, but it makes me think about a lot of the work that I've done and the things that I've seen, and it's hugely important we focus in on that or dive in a bit deeper on that, and how people can use these methods that you're using to help vanquish that, as you said, right? Help to identify it and then kind of break it apart.
Hmm. Yeah. I talk a little bit about some practical methods that could be done. I have a little ebook that I wrote. It's called 5 Ways to Immediately Start Reducing Stress in Politics. But I found that when unless you've done the inner work and you get into a situation where you encounter your splinter, you're not going to react well.
Mm-hmm.
So until the time that you're ready, it may be appropriate to kind of like back off and not put yourself in those situations. I tell people, take a break from social media, take a break from news, really be responsible for what you're putting in your brain. And when I first kind of got a hold of this fact, I went through every YouTube subscription, every person I was subscribed to on X and Facebook, and I got rid of about half of them because a lot of them were just content that was echoing the same thing in my chamber. It was, hey, let's take this latest news article and tell you what you already knew in an entertaining way, but it wasn't really giving you any insight on how to bridge the gap at all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that can often be step one, is just to take a break and work on yourself for a while. I find that just understanding that giving people space to be wrong, even if it's everyone has
Absolutely.
the right to be wrong.
Yes.
And I have to get over the notion or the feeling, and it's just pure ego, that I'm going to teach somebody something. They're wrong. They have a wrong view. Unless I can honestly talk to them and without that ego flaring up, I have no business engaging them because they're just going to be defensive about it. Because
Right.
I am not approaching them from please explain to me your world. I want to enter into it. And we all have the capacity to enter into somebody else's world. And once in a while, you'll see people flip affiliations. They're like, I was a Republican for a long time. Now I feel like I'm a Democrat. Or I was always conservative. Now I feel more liberal. Or, the Democratic Party left me behind. Now I'm something else. I'm independent. So people can change. And there's been stories of transformative change. But unless you're willing to give a little separation on what you think are your views that are the right ones, there's really not much that can happen. I don't solicit people that are firmly entrenched in their beliefs without any leeway to get in there. Matter of fact, I'm not interested in changing anybody's political beliefs. I want them to be clear, clear of the emotions and ego that come up that obscure when you're talking to somebody else, because you can't really see them as who they are. When you've got a mental picture of them being, they're part of the other side. They're the deplorables, or they're the libtards, or whatever, derogatory term we use for each other. Mm-hmm. That's a label, and that's not who that person is. No one is just their political affiliation. But until we're willing to step back and realize, okay, we have to separate these things from who we are, not much can be done. But that's my job as a coach. It's to show people that they are not their ego, that there's something much more than their ego.
Mm-hmm. No, a lot of important points there too, Chuck. When we think about people's certainty, or you talked about not soliciting people who are so strongly entrenched in their positions and things like that, not trying to change people's mind. One of the things that I say quite often on this podcast and in my talks is I'm not here to change people's minds. I'm just here to open them. The only way that we can ever course correct on anything is to have an open enough mind to admit that we might be wrong. And that's for anybody. Certainty stands in the way of more learning, Chuck, than almost anything else. And I think you said So many great things there. And this 5-step ebook that you have on how to reduce your political stress and why it's important that we do so. Kind of going back to something that we talked a little bit about earlier in the conversation, Chuck, is how people have allowed themselves, so many people, and this is just a compounding problem to the taking your political identity and making it part of your core identity. But the fact that we have allowed, as in my opinion, as part of this internet ecosystem, social media age, whatever, the fact that we have allowed so many things outside of our control to affect our lives as individuals, I think is one of the great disasters of our generation, of our lifetime. The fact that so many of these things, it used to be back in the day when we were kids, Chuck, there was not a lot of this ugliness because there was, one or two, newscasts that we would catch on our 3 stations that we had on our television, right? And they were just given, just the facts. And we didn't have these 24-hour news cycles. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have all this ugliness hitting us 24 hours a day and bombarding us. Now we have all this stuff hitting us, ebooks like this, work that you're doing to help people politically detox, Chuck, so incredibly important for our own mental well-being. So I love the fact that you've introduced me to this Jungian psychology and more of the DTH listeners than myself. I do appreciate that. I want you to tell the DTH listeners, Chuck, where can they find out more about you? And how do they get this 5-step ebook? And then we'll kind of wrap this one up. So much greatness in this conversation, though.
That's great. Yeah, I've enjoyed it. People can reach me on X, the former Twitter, Chuck Gafvert, at Chuck Gafvert. My website is chuckgafvert.com. I'm on Facebook as Chuck Gafvert, and LinkedIn, strangely enough, is an interesting place to reach out to people about this. And I've been able to do that with some success. So, yeah, and if people go to my website, there's a form there. It says, get your ebook, and you just put your email in, and that puts you on my subscription list. I don't spam anybody. I don't sell it. I'm sending out basically a newsletter once a week with some content that might be interesting for people, but they can unsubscribe at any time. So those are the main ways to reach me. And if people are interested to set up a consult with me, a little 30-minute insight session, I'd be happy to go with them a little bit more and see if they were a candidate for additional coaching.
Beautiful. Well, I do appreciate it, Chuck Gafvert. And then I also know that you've recently attended some Braver Angels events in the D.C. area, which, maybe we'll run into each other at one of these Braver Angels events and get to do some stuff together in person. So chuckgafvert.com, go to there, check out the 5 steps to reduce your political stress, and all this information will be in the show notes. Chuck Gafvert, thank you so much for joining me on the Derate The Hate podcast. I appreciate your time today, and stay well, my friend. This is fantastic.
Wilk, thank you so much for what you're doing. Enjoy being here.
Friends, if there's anything in this episode that provided exceptional value to you, please make sure to hit that share button. Share it with your friends, share it far and wide. And of course, if you haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe right from our website so you can get the Derate The Hate podcast sent to your email inbox every week. So this is Wilk wrapping up for the week saying get out there, be kind to one another, be grateful for everything that you've got, and remember it's up to you to make each and every day the day that you want it to be. If there is something that you would like to share with me, you can catch me on most social media platforms, or you can email me directly, wilk@wilksworld.com. With that, my friends, I am going to back on out of here, and we will catch you next week. Take care.